My guest today was well on her way to becoming an internal medicine physician, but she changed course, instead becoming a health coach, now focusing on really eating that healthy diet. She's also now an author of this great new book called Chew on This. With that, we welcome Dr. Brooke Bussard to the exam room. It is so good to see you here. Long overdue. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
I gotta ask you, not a lot of people go to medical school, get ready to become a doctor, and then make that hard pivot into becoming a health coach. Before we get into Chew on This, let's talk about that decision. What went into it?
Well, Chuck, it really wasn't a hard decision for me. I think it was harder for the people around me, but it was very clear to me. I started med school in the 1990s. I was so excited about pursuing a career in medicine. And, those first 2 years you spend in lectures, anatomy lab, pathology lab, and you learn so much great information. I love, love, love the human body and thinking about the way that it works. And then in your third and fourth years, you switch and you start seeing patients. And you put in really long hours, you're sleep deprived, and you're looking for ways to, make yourself feel better, whether it's with caffeine or, swinging by the GI clinic to take, proton pump inhibitors for, reflux, all of those things. And I was still enjoying seeing the patients and graduated from medical school, started my residency in internal medicine. And that first year, I just became, sort of frustrated and frankly depressed at the fact that my patients that I saw in clinic just, they didn't get better. It was sort of like they were in the deep end of a swimming pool, treading water, and I was trying to throw them, flotation devices and just, couldn't get them out of the water. And so for me, it was very clear at the end of that first year, I thought I have to do something different. This just doesn't feel good to me and doesn't feel right.
What do you think is that disconnect with your patients? And we hear these stories all the time. What is this disconnect that's preventing patients from having, these types of turnarounds that it sounds like you, as an up and coming doctor, were craving and really wanting to see?
Well, I think and I've heard you talk about it a lot on this show, is the lack of nutrition education in medical schools. I didn't have those tools at all. And when I shadowed my, residents when I was a medical student and shadowed the attendings, like I'd really never heard anybody talk about using food as medicine. And I think that is such a large part of getting healthy that is overlooked. And I just, now I think in 2023 with work from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and organizations like PCRM, we're really trying to get more nutrition education in the med schools, but it's too slow.
I know. And to be honest with you, sometimes I feel like, we get insulated. I've talked about this on the show too. We get insulated in our lifestyle medicine bubble here. And I wonder if that kind of distorts our picture of progress that's being made. Do you think that the up and coming physicians who were maybe just like you in their first year of residency, are they still experiencing these same types of frustrations? Or do you really think that there is now this mega push to start to get some more nutrition education in that medical school curriculum that could really help lend itself then to getting these types of results that we really want to see with patients?
Well, I'm an optimist, Chuck. So I am hoping that there is that push. And I'm hoping that there's enough information just in the world around us, books that are being put out, articles that are being written. I see articles, every week in the New York Times about, eating more plants for better health. And I think the more that our society learns about this and asks their doctors about it, or, the young med students read about it and know about it and inquire with, their attendings, I feel like it's going to grow organically. It's probably not going to grow straight out of a nutrition curriculum in the med schools.
I got you. And speaking of curriculums, you went to school at UVA, correct? You're a Cavalier?
Correct. Wahoo wah.
Wahoo! I mean, that's a pretty prestigious university there with a phenomenal medical school program. Did you feel like a bit of a black sheep, kind of, waving the white flag in terms of your plans to continue with residency and instead shifting and going into health coaching?
Yeah, Chuck, it wasn't pretty. I think, med schools, they have, only, a certain number of spots. And then for the residency programs, at the time, there were 4 people chosen from the med school to go into internal medicine in that residency program. And so it was, I took somebody's spot and then I left. And so that was not, smiled upon by any stretch.
Hmm. Any regrets with that decision, though?
There are no regrets.
I can't imagine.
And I feel like, I mean, the medical school, it really gave me a phenomenal education and, just really fostered, my love for the human body and my desire to help it thrive, and just be the best that it can be. And I think that has really pushed me toward, finding the best information and the best way of going about making sure every cell in our body has, the best opportunity to do what it's meant to do.
And so I guess what really, aside from working with the patients and not seeing these results, like when did the whole idea of nutrition first pop onto your radar? It's like, well, maybe this is kind of that missing link here that could really help move everybody in the right direction. Was there one particular patient you were working with, or how did this pop onto your radar at all?
Well, it didn't pop onto my radar while I was working with the patients. So when I decided to leave my residency, they had just started, this just really tells you how long ago this was. They started creating a website for the health system. And so I said, oh, I'd be happy to go and, write medical content for the website. So I started doing that. And then I started to have my own health issues, stomach aches, high blood pressure, just generally not feeling well, gaining weight. And so I started to dig in, why do I feel bad? And that's when the whole world of nutrition opened up. My sister-in-law at the same time had her first child who had a lot of food allergies. And it really raised all of this, front and center, that food has a tremendous impact on, our health. And so she and I together dug into a lot of reasons that her daughter was having rashes and having, asthma and allergies and things like that. And it really opened the door to learning about plant-based nutrition.
And forgive my asking, but how old were you at this point when you started to notice that, hey, my health is kind of in decline here? I need to make some changes myself.
Oh, Chuck, that was mid-20s, like young.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what really sticks out to me is like you would think mid-20s, prime of your life, tip-top health, great condition, like maybe we'll never be better another day in your life because that's when the bodies are supposed to be at their prime, or at least that's what we're told. That's quite the wake-up call. I remember having kind of the same epiphany myself when I was that young and not thinking I was going to live to see 30. And it doesn't sound like your conditions were necessarily that dire, but it still is a drag on you mentally to think, I'm already backsliding here in my 20s. Like, what is going on here?
Yeah, it's interesting to look back. I mean, I feel better now for sure than I did when I was in my 20s. And I look back and I think, what was I eating? I think I was eating a lot of yogurt and chicken and, drinking lattes with cow's milk and all of the things that now we know, don't promote good health.
Mm.
But they were sold as health promoting foods, when I was in my 20s and, a lot of times still are today. But we just have so much more information about them.
They are. I'm curious, were you a nutrition, or I shouldn't say nutrition nerd, a research nerd? Were you always trying to keep up with the latest studies as they were being published when you were in your residency infancy, so to speak?
And in med school, like I was known for being like the queen of resources. Like I would spend so much time in the library scouring for articles and studies and, searching PubMed for resources. And I have always really enjoyed that actually.
And how many of these studies do you recall early on that really focused on the connection between diet and diseases? Was there an abundance of them as there are today?
No, certainly not. No, I feel like when I first stumbled upon the research for plant-based nutrition, it was a lot of Dr. Barnard's research, Dr. Esselstyn's research, Dr. Ornish, sort of those, foundational studies that, really started to turn the tide for us.
And let's talk about some of the patients that you remember visiting with and those frustrations that you had. Like, why aren't they getting better here? What is the major problem there? I'm. Do you recall some of the conversations that were maybe a little bit more frustrating for you? Maybe it was chronic hypertension. Maybe it was diabetes. Maybe it was just I don't know. But like, what were the ones that really got your blood boiling? And then I promise you, we're going to make the conversation positive. Just bear with me. Let's go into the dark, and then we're going to come back out into the light.
Okay, because these patients, they were wonderful, wonderful people, and I think that's why it really broke my heart because they would come in and I would see them every 3 months or every 6 months, depending on what their issues were. They'd have diabetes, obesity, hypertension, oftentimes all three of them, and be like, Doc, I've been taking my meds, but nothing seems to be working. My sugars are still going up or my blood pressure is still high when I'm checking it at home. And I remember my attendings just saying, well, a lot of times with hypertension, it might take 2 or 3 hypertension meds just for hypertension alone to manage the situation. That's not even counting the meds that they're taking for their diabetes or, for their reflux. And, some of these patients would be taking, 8 or 9 medications every day. And, it was just this layering on of things when they kept coming back in instead of peeling off like I do now. I mean, I don't actually do the peeling off. I help guide my clients. I don't even call them patients, my clients. I help them reverse disease and work with their physicians to, come off of these medications. It's the exact opposite.
So, yeah, let's talk about that. What do you think the net difference would have been back then if they were prescribed, say, 3 healthy meals in place of those 8 or 9 different medications? What do you think that they would have seen the same type of results?
Totally. I mean, I think those are the same types of patients that I'm seeing now 20 years later. And I mean, it's just a beautiful thing. I'm one of my favorite clients who I worked with right before and during COVID. He was diagnosed with diabetes right before COVID started. And it was somebody that I knew from a local bank. And he said, Brooke, he called me up and he said, Brooke, I've heard you talk about what you do, and I've always thought it was ridiculous, but I think I need your help. And I said, oh, really? Okay. Tell me what's going on. And he said, well, I was just diagnosed with diabetes. My hemoglobin A1C is 9.6. And, I really want to turn this around. And I mean, for this to come on suddenly with a hemoglobin A1C that's that high, I mean, that's very dramatic. And I will tell you, Chuck, he locked it in like I have never seen anyone lock it in, ate nothing but a beautiful, well-balanced plant-based diet for about 6 months, and his A1C was lower than mine after 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, mine's in the normal range, but he was sub 5% for his hemoglobin A1C.
So, okay, well,
I was like, oh my God.
what a turnaround, right? And to see those results. And the thing that it kind of makes me laugh is that, you get this admission from people who are like, I thought what you were doing was kind of silly or funny or weird or just bizarre. But then when somebody gets to a point when they really do need to start making some changes to their health, it's like, well, I'm willing to try anything. And then suddenly this unique, bizarre, outside the box, weirdo concept becomes the solution that they've been looking for this whole time. I guess my question is, I mean, how do we shift the conversation from kind of being this niche little corner of the health universe to really making it kind of mainstream and okay and accepted, and strip away that taboo and that stigma so that people really can draw this simple conclusion that it's what you put into your body. Start there. Like, how do we really just make it so accepted and not so stigmatized?
I think we just keep doing what we're doing. I mean, I think we have over 300 Food for Life instructors now, don't we?
Yeah, it sounds about right.
Yeah. And so I think um, doing classes in the community, just growing it organically, I think can go a really long way. Once we sort of reach a critical mass of people, that's when you start to really shift the tide. And I think, like the book that I just wrote, Chew on This, I wrote that to try to help educate and inform people who might not otherwise be aware because they don't care for, reading nonfiction or, digging into research or studies or things like that. So I think just any way we can think of to try to spread the word is really our best approach.
And that's what I really like about this book is it is kind of unlike any other that I've read in that it to me seems like this is how you reach somebody one-on-one. We're not talking about big time articles in the New York Times or another major documentary or anything like that. This is like grassroots one-on-one conversations with people who you care about, introducing them to the idea, likely for the very first time, about what a healthy diet actually looks like. That's why I guess that's why you called it Chew on This, right? It's kind of food for thought.
Right. Yeah.
So, one of the things that I gravitated to in the book initially was the chapter that you wrote on counting calories. And it's two longtime friends, and the one was an avid calorie counter, but then the other one starts explaining the difference between how the body uses 300 calories of broccoli versus 300 calories from cookies, and just kind of the light bulb that goes off there. I mean, these are really kind of cool. These actually also could happen in real life conversations here. So, is that kind of what your idea was? Like, I want to make sure that we have conversations that could actually be happening in any doctor's office, any room, in anybody's house across the world.
Yes. So my hope and my goal was to, first of all, present the information in a new way and try to capture these conversations that I have very, very frequently with clients, family members, friends, just people that I run into at my kids' school, and share them. And for people who already eat plant-based, I thought, well, if they wanted to read the book and feel more confident in the conversations that they have with people, because I do have some good friends who are plant-based, but they tell me that it's hard for them to explain it to other people or to justify why they're, eating plants and, not eating dairy. And by, I think, giving these examples and showing these conversations, it will give them more, sort of more ammunition when they're looking for answers to questions that people ask them.
Absolutely. And that's the key here. It really is a book for people who are new to this entire concept. And as you said, for those of us who are kind of veterans in the health arena, how also to have these conversations to move the needle. Brooke, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from listeners and viewers, exam roomies who say, I just can't seem to get my friends and my family to understand what it is I'm trying to do here and why I'm doing it. And I think that this book, Chew on This, can actually really help in that direction. Were any of these conversations potentially based off of any experience that you had when you were a resident or during your time since then as a health coach?
A lot of it is, my time as a health coach.
Okay.
And I was trying also to tie in, so the one that you talked about, the 300 calories of broccoli versus cookies, I was trying to also tie in some of those great studies that are out there, but not actually present the study. Because for some people, when I give a lecture or, I'm teaching a class, I have found that the listeners, the students, they often get bogged down if I get into too much science. So it's better to present it in a way like I'm describing in the book. So in the back of my head, I'm thinking of, Hannah Kaliova's study on, plant-based foods and metabolism. I'm thinking of Kevin Hall's study where he looked at processed foods and, the difference in the amount of calories people eat when they eat processed food versus whole plant foods. I'm thinking of these studies in the background of my head as I'm writing the dialogue, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. And it was kind of refreshing to read one of these books and not see like 18 gajillion different studies like sourced in there so you can go in there and like dive in and like really do a deep dive. This is like surface level introductory stuff, but that's what makes it so daggone powerful, in my opinion. I'm curious, how did you choose the topics that you did for the various chapters? I mean, protein, that seems like a given. Everybody's always wondering about that, no matter how many times you and I or anybody else who eats a plant-based diet talks about this. It always seems to be a number one, probably the first question that comes up.
That's why it's the first chapter. That's why it's the first chapter.
But then inflammation was number two. Did you put that there as the second because you feel like it is so important that people understand the concept of inflammation?
Yeah, I think, as the science is showing us, inflammation is sort of at the core of a lot of these disease processes. And I think it's important for people to try to wrap their head around inflammation. And that's why I put it second. Yeah.
And how do you get somebody to really understand inflammation initially? Because it's not really a term that's thrown around too terribly much, right? You don't say, oh, my inflammation's acting up today, or, oh, you know what I mean? It's like, oh man, I really got heartburn, or, oh, this condition is really flared up today or that. But inflammation, it's just it hasn't really found its way to the top of the list. So when you're describing it in the book, how would you first introduce somebody to the concept of what inflammation actually is? And then to that point, also how it's really driven much of the time by your diet.
Yes, so that's why I start out that chapter. And I must say that Dorothy Wyndham did the illustrations for the book, and I was so happy to find her and connect with her. We had so much fun. And I started the second chapter, Inflammation, with a boy falling down the stairs as he was looking at his cell phone. And that's a story that happened to a friend of mine. Her daughter actually fell up the stairs while she was texting and broke her foot. This young man is falling down the stairs and twists his ankle. So I started that chapter with a form of inflammation that people can actually see, which is a swollen ankle. And then I tried to show people that you can have inflammation that you see, like a swollen ankle, or inflammation that you don't see, like what's happening in your blood vessels when you eat foods that irritate the endothelial cells that line your blood vessels. So I want people to understand that it's the same process. The immune system is trying to protect you. It's trying to heal damage. And so a lot of people, they think, oh, I want to have a better immune system. I want to have better immunity. But a lot of times they don't really know why or what that means. So thinking about it concretely, like when you twist your ankle, I think is a good way to start, and knowing that the immune system sends cells there to repair any tissue that got damaged when you sprain your ankle. Well, the same thing happens. You eat foods that are irritating to the lining of your GI tract, to the lining of your blood vessels, and your immune system responds to that, sends cells there to repair it. And sometimes that can lead to a disease process, like cardiovascular disease, because you have all these white cells in there. And like, that's not a normal process. Like, we don't want that to happen. And so you end up laying down plaques, which cause atherosclerosis, which is the reason people have heart disease.
That's so cool. You've literally just taken an analogy that basically everybody understands. That's a swollen ankle. You twisted it, you turned it, it's banged up, you get the swelling, you get the inflammation, but then you turn it, you internalize it, and then and you're able to draw the parallel between that and a lot of these chronic diseases. You were just talking about atherosclerosis, right? Heart disease. I mean, like, that's huge. And to be able to take it from something that's so well understood and then apply that to something that's, we talk about it, we know about it, but we don't quite understand it. That's awesome. That's the power of this book. And you also have in here a chapter on bacteria. I mean, I have Dr. Will Bolsowitz on here all the time for a reason, because people are fascinated by gut bacteria and they don't understand it. I can only imagine the way that you've laid this out in the book will really help people really wrap their heads around that as well.
Chuck, yeah, I put the bacteria chapter third because the bacteria have a role in the inflammation too. And I won't give too much away, but Dr. Bolsowitz has talked many times about the short-chain fatty acids that the bacteria make that have anti-inflammatory properties. But I think, a common theme here is that there are concepts that are very hard to wrap your head around because you can't see them. You can't see the process that's going on in your blood vessels. You can't see these little bacteria that live in the GI tract. And I often think about that movie, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Oh man, it's been a minute since I thought about that one. Hello.
so I love to think about, sort of being this little tiny person or thing who could go into my body and look inside my blood vessels, look inside my GI tract, and look at those cells and say, hey, how are you doing? Are you healthy? Are you not healthy? Do you like what I've been putting in here? How is that, food treating you? So I think I sort of had this strange way of thinking about the body and the cells and the vessels, and but I do it from this perspective of, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which is, I think fun if people can wrap their head around that.
Oh, I mean, come on. Who doesn't like that movie? I mean, that may have been Rick Moranis' best work ever, to be perfectly honest with you. But then these other chapters here, I mean, you've got one on carbs, which I'm sure is always a big talker. Real foods, why it's important to opt for the real food as opposed to the ultra processed. Did you choose real over whole because you thought that that's an easier word for people to understand and maybe even not get whole food confused with the grocery store?
Yeah, I just thought it was more accessible. I just thought it was, I just thought it was a better word for people to wrap their head around.
and then fat, and then milk, and then cooking, and genes, DNA not being destiny, and then planet. But I want to kind of wrap up our conversation today with chapter 10. And I think that this is such an important concept because it really does help bring into focus everything that I'm sure you talk about with your patients as a health coach and everything that's covered in this book. And that is right here, Vitamins and Minerals, chapter 10, Best in Their Natural Form. Why is it better to get something in its natural form as opposed to a supplement? How does the body treat that differently?
Well, that is something that has certainly evolved, and some light has been shed on that over the years. If we just think about vitamin E, when vitamin E was, people started to take vitamin E as a supplement, they were really only taking one type of vitamin E. And it turns out there's, I think, 8 types of vitamin E. And so people were getting all of this one type of vitamin E, and their body, even if it ate foods that had vitamin E, didn't absorb the vitamin E from the foods because it was like, oh, well, I have enough vitamin E. And it turned out that it was deleterious to their health because they were only getting a fraction of the types of vitamin E that they needed. So I think really the answer to that question is there's so much that we don't know about all the phytonutrients that go into all of the whole foods that we eat. And when we try to just extract certain vitamins or minerals or compounds, we just don't know what else we might be missing. So I think that's one of the huge dangers of doing that. We do know that places around the world where people eat whole plant foods as their diet, they live the longest, healthiest lives. So getting all of our nutrients from whole foods just makes sense if we look around, epidemiologically. So I'm not a huge fan of, trying to say, oh, this is a superfood or this is a super nutrient and we should take it as a pill in high doses. I think it's really important just to use the whole plant food because, there is such a combination of nutrients that probably work as a symphony instead of just having, a drum solo. I think that's probably the best way to think about it.
Hey, man, not that there's anything wrong with a good drum solo. I still remember Inagata Davida. That was like a 5-minute drum solo that was just epic. But I got you, and I love the way that you put that, and it's just so brilliant. The entire book is brilliant. Chew on this. We've dropped a link to it in the show description and in the episode notes. Definitely want to pull up your copy, get a copy. And you know what I love about this too is like, I was reading this and I was like, you know what? If this is something that parents wanted to speak to their kids about and introduce it this way, the way that the book is written, it's not on a level that will go over the child's head. Like I would think that beginning like even as young as like the 6th or 7th grade, like a lot of these concepts can start to be understood when the child is young. And I think that sets them up for a much healthier future as well.
I agree, Chuck, and I'm glad that you think so as well. I really tried to write it on a level that was accessible pretty much from middle school till, the rest of your life. I think these concepts, it's not a book about dieting. It's a book about how the body works and how to choose foods that are health promoting and not health hindering. And so that was my goal was, just to make it sort of an entertaining guide to healthy eating.
I think that you nailed it. You're not talking up to anybody. You're not talking down to anybody. It's just right. It's kind of like Goldilocks and the 3 bears. Too hot, too cold, just right,
Yeah.
So I absolutely think that you nailed it. And so everybody go out and pick up your copy. Chew on this. Dr. Brooke Bussard, thank you so much. Congratulations on the release.
Thanks, Chuck. I really appreciate it.
If your health IQ is a couple of points higher than it was a few minutes ago, go ahead and like this video or subscribe to the YouTube channel. And to take it even higher, head over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get your favorite shows. Look for The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. Hit the subscribe button there as well and help to make your world a healthier place.